So I've had a look at the questions and I'll try to answer them as best as I can. Didn't actually get that much time to look at them, I'm afraid. Got them just after the last presentation, and I'm sure all of you have struggled to eat your meal and perhaps have a short walk or have a conversation and get back to class. It's been quite tight. So I had 18 questions so far. I don't expect that I will be able to answer all 18. So I'm not going to, I don't know how many of, I guess very few of us have got the list of questions. So it doesn't really matter what order I answer them in. But for any of you who do have the written version, I'm going to begin with question number 6. Okay. Question number 6. So I'm hoping the translators all have a copy of the questions. If they don't, perhaps they could be sent a copy so that they can translate them, because it's a written document. They should be, at least half the translators should be able to translate what they've got relatively easily, and at least the others can see what the question is. Number 6. An elderly lady in this movement who is about 80 years old wants to know, so it looks like this 80-year-old sister isn't writing herself, someone is writing on her behalf. She wants to know if marital relationships with her equally elderly husband will affect their salvation. And what she means by marital relationships is that they have sexual intercourse. She no longer has any desire for intimacy and feels she no longer has the strength to meet her husband's physical needs. So I'll just stop there to give the scenario as I understand it. There's a couple, she's 80 years old. I don't know exactly how old her husband is, but it says that he's equally elderly, so he must be around the same age, and she no longer desires to have intimacy, to have sex with him, but he still has, it's the way it's portrayed, he still has the strength to do so, and therefore he still has the desire. So he has still the desire to have intimacy with her, but she doesn't have that desire any longer. So that's the scenario. The question is, she's very worried that this might be considered a sin in the eyes of God and might lose her salvation over this matter if she continues to deny her husband. So I think it's I guess it's I don't know if the sister is listening, by the way. There's no way of me knowing if the sister is listening to this answer, but I guess whoever asked the question is listening and will then obviously be able to portray the question to her. And I think the fact that this question is even being asked is a sad indictment on the actual condition that we find ourselves in this movement, that a sister feels that, not that she has to ask the question, that's fair enough, but she actually feels that her salvation is at stake if she doesn't meet the desires of her husband. Now, it's not for me to go back, we could easily do that, go back to the marriage vows that this couple exchanged, and I'm assuming that their exchange of vows when they first married is in line or in agreement with the vows that most couples share, even if it's a cultural wedding as opposed to what we might call a Christian wedding. I have no idea what shape or form their wedding took, but from whatever culture you were in, whatever your position is, most people, I'd venture to say all couples, when they go into marriage, make some kind of vow or some kind of commitment to one another. Even if it's an unspoken vow, an unspoken commitment. And that is to support and nurture each other until, in the English they say, until death do us part. Until death, or one of them succumbs to the ravages of death or an accident, and the spouse is then left by themselves, and obviously the marriage then is dissolved. But as long as they remain married, and God's ideal is that they remain one flesh, husband and wife, until, as I say, one of them dies, they make a commitment to each other to support one another through whatever ups and downs they may have. Now, this question is framed from the perspective of an elderly couple who don't appear to have any accidents or physical damage or any kind of problem like that. The sister has just got to an age where nature has taken its course. She is tired. Perhaps her body doesn't have the same desires and urges as it did when she was younger, and she no longer feels the urge or the desire or the inclination to have sex with her husband, but he doesn't feel the same. Now, this can happen to many couples for many different reasons throughout their marriage. One of the spouses may have an accident where they are physically impaired, perhaps they are mentally impaired through an accident, and they can no longer function in the way that they used to, and therefore the commitment that they had made to meet the physical desires of their spouse can no longer be kept, for genuine proper reasons, of course. Or, as is sometimes the case, I don't want to say it's often the case, but sometimes it's the case that a woman after childbirth can be affected in a number of different ways, whereby she may come to the place, sometimes very short-lived, sometimes this thing can happen for a number of months or years, and sometimes it may even be permanent, that they no longer desire to have intimacy with their husband. Something has changed within them, and they just find it difficult to come close to their husbands. Sometimes it can be painful. There are a number of both mechanical or physiological and psychological difficulties that a woman can get into after pregnancy and childbirth that would prevent her, either temporarily and very rarely permanently, desiring or being able to have intimacy with her husband. And far too often, the way this dynamic is portrayed is if the woman has done something wrong. She is causing some kind of problem, and the way this sister frames it, that she's so concerned about this that she's worried not only is she sinning, but that she might lose her eternal salvation because she denies the physical want of her husband. And if the questioner can portray this to the sister, or if she's already listening, I don't know. It's to basically say that what a really sad and horrible view this sister has both of marriage and of God, that she has been brought to the place through her, I'm going to say through her education, that she thinks if she doesn't meet the demands, she says the needs of her husband, but it really is his demands, that she might lose her eternal salvation. So just from a theological position, from an exchange of vows, of course this woman would not lose eternity just because she cannot meet the desires, the lusts, I don't know what else to call it besides that, because the more you think about this situation, the more I'm hoping that each of us can see how ugly it really is. It's not that she is rejecting her husband, she just is not capable of fulfilling his lusts. And in such a case, for her to think that she would lose eternal life over that is an indictment not only upon her husband and his view of things, but also an indictment upon, I'm going to say, this movement, not to accuse any individuals per se in this movement, but to indicate that we're still at a place where our understanding of how relationships work are so, I'll say patchy, because there are people who do understand things well, that this sister finds herself asking this question. I think it's a real, important and genuine question. So the simple answer is, of course, my sister, you will not lose your eternal life because you can't meet the needs of your husband. What if your husband was impotent? What about if he had suffered or was suffering from prostate problems or high blood pressure, or any one of various arterial diseases which made his ability to have an erection difficult or perhaps non-viable? And if the situation was turned the other way around, I think we would all know, and I'm sure this sister would know, that she would never view her husband, who could not meet her needs, as losing eternal life because he couldn't get an erection and meet her needs. No one, including this sister, I'm sure, would contemplate such a scenario. But unfortunately, and I don't say this in any way to blame my sister, it's just an indictment upon humanity where we are, that you can have an aged sister who, in that part of her life, should be receiving comfort and warmth from her children, her grandchildren, but especially from her husband. And rather than that, it's obvious that she feels isolation, she feels, I'm gonna suggest, intimidation, to think that her eternal salvation is not secure because she can't meet her husband's needs. And I don't want to paint her husband in a negative light. I don't know their family or their marital situation. If they were desirous to, they could approach one of the elders. They could approach Elder Tabo or Elder Tess to receive further counsel. I don't know which country they're from. If they're from Zimbabwe, they could go to Elder Marshall. But you could go to your local elder, or then go to your continental elder, or you could approach one of the leaders in the movement to talk about this situation in more detail if there were peculiarities to the situation that are not coming through in this question. But as the question stands, this sister would not lose eternal life because she cannot have sex with her husband. Now, this opens up a broader question which we have been tackling in our relationship studies over the past few weeks. I don't know how many of you have listened to those. I don't know if this sister has, but to bring pleasure to your partner doesn't always involve sexual intercourse. There are other ways, and we haven't gone into any explicit detail of what those ways would be. They're easily available through books, through the internet, through counseling. What other ways a couple can meet the needs of their spouse if for any reason there are problems such as this, or foreplay, or a whole plethora of other reasons why people don't just have sexual intercourse. It's not a switch like it's off and sexual intercourse and that's all there is. There are myriad of ways of meeting your spouse's physical and emotional needs besides sleeping with them, if sleeping with them is not an option. And so I would suggest to this sister that she should get some proper help from someone who's both sympathetic and educated along these lines. So say one of the elders may be able to help, or she may need to get professional help to see how they can function at a physical level in a way that both of them feel comfortable. So I'm hoping that answers that question. It's very difficult to get feedback when we've got so many people here. And as I say, obviously in an intimate question like this, I doubt if the person would want to name themselves. But I would recommend, if the sister needs further counsel or further advice, to approach an elder. And as I say, there are many of us that would be available to do that. It doesn't have to be an elder. It could be a sister whom she may have confidence in. We have a number of female elders in the movement. There's Elder Tess, there's Elder Chiquetta, but there are equally sisters of experience in many parts of the world that she could turn to. So I'm hoping that she doesn't suffer in silence, but she should leave this meeting knowing that her eternal salvation is not contingent on her performance in the bedroom. It just not is so. It doesn't work that way, and it's sad that someone somewhere along her experience has made her feel that way. It's made her feel that cheap and low that she becomes a sort of like someone who services her husband. So I hope that answers that question. Next question, question 7. What is going to happen for baptism, seeing the situation still restricts movements and meetings? What will be the way forward when others really desire to be baptized into the movement? So the question is, because of COVID-19 and essentially the worldwide lockdown that's occurring, how do we deal with the subject of baptisms, people who desire to be baptized? Now, the question is quite confined, but I just want to broaden it a little bit, and I want to add a little bit of perspective. There are a number of people listening to these studies who are aware of, I don't want to call it a change of direction, because it really shouldn't be a change, but it really is taking the subject of baptism much more seriously. Elder Tess and myself have deemed it necessary to be involved in a number of cases that deal with baptisms. And what I'm referring to is the following. Far too many people in our movement have not received proper baptismal classes. They either have not had any classes, they may have just had a quick chat, or they may never have had any classes if they were baptized in the very early days in 2018, or the classes that they have been woefully inadequate. And if you feel that you're in that situation and you're already baptized, what I would really want to recommend to you to do, and if I knew you personally, I would insist upon it, not force you, but I would really encourage you strongly to go to your local leadership and ask for baptismal classes, systematic baptismal classes. There are too many people in our movement who have not been properly trained. And in fact, we have too many leaders in our movement at various levels who have not received systematic baptismal classes. So that's one point that we have started to get really serious about. And connected to that is a real drive now, and as much as we're able to, an insistence upon that people who are having baptismal classes, that they should only have one-on-one classes. There should not be group baptismal classes, as much as we're able to avoid them. We know that there are situations which are unavoidable where some kind of group class has to happen, but we think it should be the exception, not the rule. And by exception, we mean it should be rare. We know that people have problems with the internet. We know that in many places of the world, there's a cost that people are ill-equipped to bear because of the internet problems. They have a low income, internet can be relatively expensive, and there is a financial impact. Whatever the reason is, my answer would be, on that level, heaven is cheap enough. And I say that quoting Ellen White in a different application, of course. But heaven really is cheap enough. And we should be very cautious about measuring the worth of heaven by a few dollars paying for some internet data. Far too many of us have been, as I said, been baptized, ill-equipped. There are people who are currently undergoing classes in large groups, and for Elder Tess and myself, a large group would be 3 people, unless there are very exceptional reasons why you would have a class that large. And I say 3 because I know that there are groups at the moment where people are having upward of 5 people in a class, and we should not be doing that. As soon as we get involved in a situation that deals with baptism, we are making strenuous efforts to investigate class sizes, teacher to pupil or teacher to student compatibility, and we try to do as best as we can matching up teachers and students. As you can imagine, the old adage is true: the work is great and the teachers are few. And yet we really want to try to continue this work of, as far as possible, having individual teachers. Individual teachers for one student, one-on-one classes. And so this is partly a call to those people who are teachers to be more generous with their time and with their care, And we know that it's not easy. We know that the vast majority of you have full-time employment, but yet we still are asking that people will open up and make themselves more available and take on an extra class here, an extra couple of classes there, so that we can have as many people as possible go through baptismal classes on an individual basis. Group baptismal classes are not the norm. They should be the very rare exception. They're not productive of any good. We know that some people will argue that people are introvert or they like listening to people's questions. All of these may seem like valid arguments, but we believe when you weigh everything in the balance that the best way to move forward would be to have one-on-one individual classes where people's needs would be met properly. So coming back to the original question, what's going to happen about baptism, those people who are ready? So my first point is there are very few people that are actually ready to be baptized today who have really been gone through a proper series of classes with a teacher one-on-one and actually know the truths of this movement well. But those numbers will increase, of course, as we get the first cohort of students who have gone through good studies. Unfortunately, the answer is I don't know. We don't know how long this pandemic will last. It's not just a matter of traveling or restriction of movements. Even in a location, say for instance in Zimbabwe, if you lived in Harare, you have an elder, I'm going to call it a local elder, who lives within the vicinity of a large group of people, and so distance isn't the problem. It's actually contact with people, how we would go about doing that. And at the moment, I'm saying for most people, it's not safe to actually conduct the baptismal ordinance or to receive them. So until that changes, and we don't know when that will change, the actual ordinance of baptism really is being put on hold. So I don't really have an answer to the question when those things will change. The questioner asked, what will be the way forward when they're ready to be baptized? We don't know at the moment. All we know is that it's not safe for people to expose themselves in this dangerous way. Things may change in a few months. They may not. It's hard to tell. But one thing that I want to assure anybody and everybody who desires baptism, and it's this, that if you're not able to be baptized because of circumstances outside of your control, then you are not held responsible for not being baptized. Your eternal salvation is not affected by the physical act of immersion if you are unable to be immersed, baptized, through no fault of your own. So I really want us all to be to have that assurance and that comfort that if the reason you haven't been baptized is circumstances outside of your control, either the movement cannot get an elder to you to baptize you, and the reason is in this situation the pandemic, then it's not your responsibility. You're innocent, and God will look upon you favorably. God looks upon the heart, not upon the action, in cases such as this. So I want to assure people not to be worried if you desire baptism and you are ready, but it doesn't happen. So I hope that answers that question. Next question. How can we help other groups or fellowships who cannot afford Zoom meetings in the midst of this pandemic? So what I would really ask whoever's question this is, if they could either approach Elder Tabo, Elder Tess, or myself. And the reason I've mentioned those three names is because even though this is a movement-wide camp meeting, it is being hosted by the ministry in Zimbabwe, Alpha and Omega, and Elder Tabo is the continental elder for that ministry for Zimbabwe. So they can either approach him or approach Elder Tess and myself. Now, without going into the intricacies or the details of this, not every group needs to open their own account or to pay an upfront cost to holding a Zoom meeting. It depends how big the Zoom meeting is, for one thing. You can pay Zoom on a month-by-month basis. You can pay it yearly. And if you wanted to hold a one-off camp meeting, it's relatively inexpensive compared to the cost of holding an in-person live camp meeting. It's a fraction of the cost. The regular account limits you to 100 people. Currently, this camp allows up to 500 people. It's a slightly additional cost. There are various packages that you can have. So what I'm suggesting is, even a poor ministry can afford a basic Zoom account which allows up to 100 people, and it's less than $20, I think, for one camp meeting. Maybe a little bit more, but I think it's less than 20. It's a minuscule amount. And then you have the option, if you want to have more, is that you can switch to YouTube live stream. Zoom is not the only platform that you can use. There are other platforms that are available. Google has a platform, Microsoft has a platform, and I think those platforms are currently free. There's no charge to them, but I don't know the details. So I don't think cost is actually a big problem. Elder Tabo is quite skilled and well versed in Zoom, the packages, the availability, the implementation. So whoever is asking this question, I think he would be the best person to ask initially to see how this can be managed. I really don't think it's a matter of expense. I don't know why this person thinks that it's so expensive. Zoom is relatively inexpensive. But if money is a problem, perhaps we could even find a way to support you and pay for the Zoom. But as I say, I think it's under $20 for a one-off payment for 1 month for 100 people, which I think any ministry can afford. So I hope that answers that question. Speak to Elder Tabo. He understands all about the packages and the options that are available. I'm assuming everybody knows his contact details. They should know his contact details. If you don't, contact the organizers of this camp and they can give you Elder Tabo's contact details. Next question. This is related to baptism. Question 9. If a second wave of the pandemic blows in 2021 next year, as we saw with the Spanish flu of 1918, what impact can it have to both the priests and the Levites? So I guess one of the problems that I have with this question is that the person is taking the Spanish flu and its sequencing of the first and second waves and applying that in some literal fashion to our history. That those waves occurred sequentially one after another, that they're expecting a second wave to occur in our history in the same way, 2020, 2021. So if there is such a thing as a second wave, and I'm not really sure of all the implications of what that means, because people talk about a second wave occurring depending on what part of the hemisphere, what hemisphere you live in the spring if in the southern hemisphere, in the autumn if in the northern hemisphere, September, October, November time. They're expecting what they call a second wave then when flu season comes. So I don't know when the second wave will come, what it will look like and its impact. But if it does come, the question is, what impact will it have to both priests and Levites? And the simple answer is, we don't really know, except to suggest that it will be much of what we're experiencing now. This lockdown that we're having, this inability to move around. I think the world will become more sophisticated in its response to COVID-19. I suspect by sometime next year, mid to late next year, there will definitely be a vaccine that's available. So that will be some change. But I think the way governments, institutions, companies, families deal with COVID-19 will be a lot smarter as the months roll on. So it will have a detrimental impact to what we imagined things were going to be. And if we have the mindset that COVID-19 happened independent of what our actions were as a movement, then we know that all things work for good to those that love him. And if that's the case, we would just wait and see what impact it has, because it really is out of our control. And I think we should not worry unduly what it is. And the only reason people are concerned is because they have a preconceived idea, a model of what the end will look like. And this seems to be breaking or shattering people's perspective of what is going on or what will happen. Question 10. A week ago, I was given a theme for the local conference church. So I assume that this person attends a local conference church, which is a good thing. And the subject they asked me to teach on was the chapter, The Shaking of Events of the Last Days. So I'm not sure what book this person is referring to, but the title of the chapter is The Shaking of Events of the Last Days. Then he or she continues. So it was necessary to clarify the apparent contradiction between his own quotes in the church, which put the latter rain before the Sunday law, and after the Sunday law, as well as in the shaking. So I got a bit confused about the wording of this question, but I'm assuming what this person is referring to is the point that I brought up earlier, that this movement speaks about the latter rain occurring before Sunday law, and Ellen White and the church teaches it's after the Sunday law, and this person was asked to deal with the shaking of the last days, and they were asked to explain what it is that they believe. And the person says, with methodology it was clear, and even the pastor was satisfied. Our methodology showed that it is far from contradicting Ellen White. In fact, it clarified it. So I don't know the details or the intricacies of this story, but I guess it was a testimony that this person was bringing forward based upon what I had taught. that if we use good, correct methodology, that our message doesn't contradict Ellen White, but helps to clarify and explain Ellen White, and um, and Ellen White's writings can be used to defend what we teach, not used to attack what we teach. And I guess this person was bearing testimony to that fact, that with good hermeneutics, with good methodology, you can defend what we teach, even when you have apparent Ellen White quotes that don't make sense, that contradict this idea or this concept. It's to do with this point 2, where the part doesn't equal the whole. You have to gather a lot of information in order to understand the subject well. Question 11. What is the outlook for medical missionary work in this movement? Is it something that we'll be yet pursuing? And how do we adjust the understanding of health and healing in the light of modern advancement of knowledge in the field of medicine? So the first thing I want to say is that true medical missionary work was, is, and will be always in agreement with true medicine, with true conventional medicine, if I can call it that, allopathic medicine, if people want to use that term. There is no contradiction between the two, because as much as each one is based upon science, they should be saying the same thing. So the questioner asks, what is the outlook of medical missionary work in the movement? What I want to say is, in the past, when Ellen White spoke about the medical missionary work, the environment in which she operated, in which medical missionaries operated, was basically one of ignorance on the part of society. Large swathes of people had no idea how to take care of their own health. And what the medical missionary work provided, what Adventism provided, was a clear, unequivocal message that people could take their health into their own hands and self-manage. Unfortunately, because the medical missionary work is now handled today in our movement, and I don't say this disrespectfully, but I say it hopefully in a constructive way, by fringe elements. And what I mean by that is it's handled by people who essentially are completely unqualified and uneducated in the field of healthcare. They're people like myself who have no proper medical background. They read a few books, go and take a course from another amateur. It's like the blind leading the blind, and they portray themselves as medical missionaries. And I don't think this is the true medical missionary work. Not at least the way Ellen White instructed it to be delivered and rolled out by this church. The medical missionary work, as I understand it, was led out by career doctors, people who had been through medical school. And they would set up institutes of learning. We would call them sanitariums, but those sanitariums were also training schools. And you would get people who were trained to be medical missionaries. We don't have that culture anymore, which is why I use the term fringe elements. And as I say, I don't mean that to disparage anybody. I'm not trying to say that lay people, uneducated, medically uneducated people, are doing a bad job or don't understand how the human body works. But what the point I want to make is that in that day and age, we had a clear message to give to an uneducated world who didn't know how to take care of their bodies. Today, that's the 19th century, today in the 21st century, we live in a completely different world. First of all, we live in an educated world. And what I mean by that is I don't mean we have lots of people with degrees. I mean we have an enlightened populace all through the world, by and large. And we are quite familiar with how to take care of our bodies. Governments generally have done a reasonably good job at educating the populace. Sanitation, hygiene has come of age. In 200 years, the norm is not to have a bath once a week and to use a small basin to wash your face daily, perhaps in cold water, but people throughout most parts of the world have access to good quality clean water on an almost daily basis. If you live in the West, we all have showers. So what I want to say is that the world generally has come of age when it comes to understanding how to take care of our bodies. So the work of the medical missionary isn't as useful or as necessary as it was in the past, because most people know how to take care of their body. It's not that it's unnecessary today. There are still large swathes of the populace who are still pretty much ignorant on how to function properly. And the one area that I think medical missionary work can have a real impact even today is in the area of diet reform, of what we eat. Unfortunately, the vast majority of us, I would venture to say, even in this group, don't eat properly ourselves. Therefore, we would find it very difficult to be true missionaries to the world when essentially we eat like the world. Far too few of us actually eat, I'll use a colloquial term, not one that Ellen White uses, very few of us eat the blueprint diet, whatever that may mean to you, the medical missionary diet, that pure diet that medical missionaries strive to eat themselves and strive to have their patients or their clients eat. Very few of us eat that way. In fact, we have imported the world into our own kitchens and dining rooms rather than exporting our message to the world. So I'm not trying to say that to accuse anybody, but what I am saying is the reality, as far as I see it, on true medical missionary work in the 21st century is diet reform. There are so many winds of doctrine in the world about how to take care of our diet, how to take care of our bodies. And unfortunately, I don't know if you're familiar with this term, it's not unfortunate that you don't, is I think we have the tail wagging the dog. We are the dog, the world is the tail. The world is controlling, directing how we eat. And far too many of us don't have a proper education in nutrition, in how to actually take care of our bodies. And what we have done is forgotten the first principles that Ellen White has given us, and then taken those principles and developed them, deepened them, and refined them to make them practical in the 21st century. I would suggest there are far too few of us who have done courses in nutrition, in biochemistry, and therefore we, by and large, have no idea how the human machine works, how we're supposed to take care of ourselves. to show you how bad things are in this movement, because that's where we're talking about. If I were to do a poll now, we've got around, I don't know how we count this, I think it's over 130 people listening. If we were to do a count on what a normal diet should look like, is it high carbohydrate, high protein, high fat, ketogenic diet, low fat diet, no fat diet, a fruit diet, a raw diet? If I were to give you all those choices, I think if I said there are 7 choices, pick your one, what is the true medical missionary diet, I think we would have between us 7 different answers. And I think that is the challenge of the medical missionary work, is that we no longer have any vision of what true medical missionary work is. We don't even know truth from error. We don't need to teach the world that they need to exercise more. Everyone knows that. Whether they practice it or not is different. You could open a gym and facilitate that, but everybody knows to do that. Everyone knows that they shouldn't smoke. We don't need to educate people on that. They know. I'm not saying you couldn't have an anti-smoking campaign or a class on that. Everyone knows that drinking alcohol is damaging to the body. Whether they listen or not is another thing. We don't need to educate the world on those things. What we need to educate the world on is diet reform, what we should eat. And the problem is, if I just stick to this movement has no idea of what the true diet is. We have too many different ideas. I'm not claiming to be an expert on this subject. I'm just answering the question as best as I see it. That the outlook of medical missionary work is it's a grim, poor outlook from my perspective. And it's not because this movement doesn't believe in the medical missionary work. It's not that we don't teach the medical missionary work or that we wouldn't enjoy it. It's that we don't even know how to live that medical missionary work ourselves. Everyone knows to exercise. That's fine. Everyone knows to be temperate, to wash regularly. All that's fine. The world knows all of that as well. We can't teach the world any of those things. But what we should be clear on is what we are supposed to eat. And this movement, from my estimation, is not clear on that subject. And so what will happen is you have 3 medical missionaries. One of them will say eat this way, the second will say eat another way, and the third will say eat a different way. And that is not what medical missionary work is, because it says missionary. That means a mission of life and death. And the life and death message that we have for the world is a singular message, not variations on the theme. So until we're able to understand ourselves what the true diet is that God has given to his people, I don't think there is much hope about getting the medical missionary work up and running properly. There are some ancillary components to the medical missionary work that Adventists love to focus on, and one of them is herbology. Herbology is the study of using herbs to replace drug medication, and herbology is again a specialist art and only fills a niche element, a small portion of the medical missionary work. The other portion, which is useful, is hydrotherapy. And hydrotherapy comes in many shapes and sizes, but number one hydrotherapy is actually body cleanliness, which basically means shower regularly, keep your bodies clean and hygienic, keep your pores open. All of that the world already understands. We don't need to teach them that. So besides a few techniques on hydrotherapy, such as a hot foot bath to alleviate a headache, which most of us can learn relatively easily. I think that what's really lacking about the medical missionary work is understanding what we should eat, and there doesn't seem to be any consensus on that. And the reason is because we have gone to the world to try to understand what we should eat, as opposed to going to God and to science, at least science, true science. So I'm hoping I've answered that question. Got a few moments left. So, oh wait there. Okay, number 15. I'm jumping around a bit. I do not know if this question has been asked before in the courtship and marriage sessions, those studies that have been done on relationships recently. It pertains of two people in the movement intending to get married, but their parents are not in the movement. Two people want to marry, their parents, his parents and hers, are not in the movement. If they will not bless the marriage, the parents, if the lobola ceremony has not been done, so I assume this couple or this question is from someone in Zimbabwe, or at least Southern Africa. Lobola, for those who are unaware, is a local term, if I can say it simplistically, I hope I don't do it a disservice, is a local term for dowry. If they will not bless the marriage because the dowry has not been paid, and lobola, it says the lobola ceremony, it's not just a payment of money or sometimes cows or something. There's a whole ceremony that's involved in this as well. If that's not been done, what advice could you give to such a couple? Should they continue and get married without the consent of the parents? Can the movement override the parents' authority in terms of a marriage between their children? So I want to turn to two Bible passages. I'll give you both references. I'll just read one of them. The first one is Ephesians chapter 6, verse 1. Ephesians 6:1. Ephesians 6:1. Second quote is Colossians chapter 3, verse 20. Colossians 3:20. So Colossians 3:20, Ephesians 6:1. I'm going to read Ephesians 6:1. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor thy father and thy mother, which is the first commandment, with promise, that it may be well with thee, and thou mayest live long on the earth. Just want to read Colossians 3:20. I've changed my mind. I want to read both of them. Children, obey your parents in all things, for this is well pleasing unto the Lord. So Ephesians, both passages are saying the same thing, but you can see that the language in Ephesians is a lot tighter, a lot more precise. It says, obey your parents in the Lord, but Colossians says, obey your parents in all things. So those all things, there is a clause that's attached to that. It says, for this is well pleasing unto the Lord. So if your parents told you to commit some crime, that of course would not be well pleasing to the Lord. So the all things must be, I'm going to say, all good things, or all things that are in God's will or in the Lord. So if I can say it this way, things have changed now in the movement. Our understanding of how family structures are supposed to work has changed. In its most simple, basic sense, because of the subject of equality, the idea of headship is no longer an acceptable way of two people living their lives together. So I'll say that really simply, because of equality, headship no longer works. And this idea of paying a dowry, of lobola, and all the ceremonies that are attached to that, and whatever country you're from, you'll have your own versions of this. All of that modeling is based upon a principle of headship. And because headship is no longer in the Lord, therefore lobola or dowry is no longer in the Lord. We now recognize that lobola, dowry, whatever name you give it, is nothing more than human trafficking. And we will no longer tolerate that in the movement. That being the case, if your parents are saying you cannot marry because you won't pay lobola, but all things being equal, they would allow the marriage, so they don't have a problem. The boy's family doesn't have a problem with the girl, and the girl's family don't have a problem with the boy. There's not a problem with the individuals. There's not a problem that the families wouldn't get along with one another. All six of those people, the couple and their parents, are all okay if someone paid the money, if they went through the ceremonies that would reinforce the status quo of the husband being the head of the wife. If everybody played that game, then there would be no problem. The parents would consent to the marriage. So you already know in this dynamic what the problem is. That the problem is about the lobola. It's not honoring your parents, that the girl's parents would say, that's the girl, that's the parents would say, this boy, we don't like him. He is not a suitable partner for you because of A, B, or C. Whatever that might be. This is not that dynamic. In that dynamic, there may be, and probably is, good reason to listen to your parents if it's reasonable advice. But in this situation of dowry payment, all four people, all four parents are wrong, and they're no longer in the Lord, because we believe the Lord has spoken and has directed this movement in the path of equality, which means we no longer can be involved or sanction human trafficking, slavery, let's call it what it is, and all dowry, from the payment to the smallest act of that whole system, is all reinforcing this slavery headship model. And if we believe, and the leaders of this movement believe this, if we believe that equality is the testing message of this dispensation, then we know that we can no longer participate in that. And therefore, parents that insist on following that model are no longer in agreement with God's will. And as per the two Bible passages that we read, Ephesians 6, Colossians 3, the children are not required to obey their parents because their parents are asking them to do something that is not God's will. And therefore, if that couple decide that they want to marry outside of the consent of their parents, of their family, if they're willing to forgo all of what that means, being separated from your parents, then we in the movement would support that situation, that the movement can override the parents' authority in terms of marriage between their children, because the parents are no longer in God's will. If that's the decision that that couple wanted to make, that they desired to be married, and the parents said no on this issue. So I hope that answers that question. Question 16. Who is the woman in Revelation 17? So I don't know if that's a correct question. I think the way it's framed, the question itself is reasonable. I think people are aware of the following word, the personification of an object. When you personify something, you turn an inanimate object into a person. So you can turn an organization or an inanimate object into a person, and that is what is being done in Revelation 17. So when the questioner asks, who is the woman? I don't think it's fair to say who as opposed to what. What is the woman in Revelation 17? Because it's not a person. That's the first point I want us to see. And to answer the question directly, what is the woman in Revelation 17? The simple answer to that question is it's the daily. That question was first answered unequivocally, as far as I'm aware, in this movement in December 2007 by Elder Manjit at a camp meeting that was done in Wales. It's the first time, as far as I'm aware, that that answer was given, or the answer to that question was given, which is 13 years ago now. So it's a good question, but the answer has been around for 13 years already. So it's not a new question, it's a good question. It's not who, it's what, and the woman in Revelation 17 is the daily. Question 17. Based upon Daniel 11, the narrative about the behavior of the king of the south after Raphia, how is the king of the south persecuting the church right now? If I recall, and I'm hoping my memory serves me well, if it doesn't, I'm sure someone will tell me and I'll correct it tomorrow. After the battle of Raphia, the king of the south, having won, goes up to Jerusalem, tries to enter into the most holy place, is rebuked, chastised, almost dies through some supernatural phenomena, goes back to Egypt, and I think it's the city of Alexandria, it may be another city, but goes back to Egypt, and in his rage punishes all of the Hebrews that live in that area, because he has a hatred towards God's people now because of what happened to him in Jerusalem. I think that's the story that is being referred to in the question. So the question is, how is the king of the south persecuting the church right now? And my answer to that the simple answer would be, I have no idea. But I think the more correct answer would be, who says that the King of the South would even be persecuting the church right now? What the questioner is doing is taking a literal story that happened around 2,500 years ago, thereabouts, and they are trying to apply it literally today. They want to take this church and make it literally into God's church as it was then. And this is what was tried by the movement a few years ago by FFA when they were conducting classes. I don't say that to criticize them. I just want to give a reference point. And there was a lot of speculation about what that would look like. Would the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Russia be persecuted? If not Seventh-day Adventism, would Protestantism in general be persecuted by Russia? And what happened soon after those studies is that some denominations, I think it was Jehovah's Witnesses, someone can correct me, that denomination was indeed persecuted by the Russian government, and people saw that as a fulfillment of prophecy, this particular prophecy. And all I want to say is, I don't think that's the correct way of analyzing this. It's going from literal to literal. And the problem is, as soon as you do that, you're starting to mix and match. For one thing, the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Egypt is not being persecuted. The King of the South has moved from Egypt to Russia, and therefore that is all spiritual, and yet people want to make a literal church being punished to a literal church being persecuted today. And I think that's where their mistake is. People are looking for the wrong thing. And if the questioner would ask me, well, what should they be looking for? My simple answer would be, I have no idea. But I do have an idea that it shouldn't be about persecuting the church, because that is breaking this rule of going from literal to literal. So I've managed to get through 12 questions out of the 18, which, if you know me, is good going, because in 1 hour it would normally be about 3 questions. I'd normally be doing good to get through 3 questions in 1 hour. So I did pretty well, hopefully. We had 6 questions left. I wasn't in any way trying to avoid the questions, but I just didn't get around to doing it. I tried to prioritize the ones that I thought were important or interesting for me, which is a cool way of saying the ones that were the easy questions, and I left the hard ones out. Hopefully I may be able to tackle some of these tomorrow, depending on the next batch of questions that I get. I want to wish everybody a happy Sabbath or a happy new week, depending on where you are in the world. I hope it's been a blessing. I hope the people who have asked those questions have had their questions answered fairly and reasonably. Or actually, I only answered 9 questions. I lied to you. Not 12. It was only 9. Wasn't it? It was a mistake. I didn't lie, really. I answered not half the questions, which is still pretty good. I hope you've had a blessed time, and let's close with prayer. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for your goodness and your watch care over your people. Lord, I want to pray for those people who have asked those questions, that their questions would have been answered, and where I failed to answer them correctly or in a limited fashion, I pray, Lord, that you would bring someone into the lives of these questioners to answer their questions in a more complete and full way. For those questions that I've missed, that I may not be able to get to, I hope and pray to have an opportunity to answer them at a later date, or failing that, Lord, could you please find a way that those questions could be answered for those people. Lord, I want to offer up an individual prayer for every single one of these people. Some of their questions were personal, about baptism, about the sense of being eternally lost because of a breakdown in a person's relationship due to the physical, natural changes that each of us experience. And some people had theological questions which they may have wrestled with. I hope everybody receives the blessing. I want to thank you, Lord, for all that you have done and continue to do. Be with us and bless us until we meet tomorrow. In Jesus' name, amen.